Hey everybody, and welcome to the 5 Bytes podcast. I'm your host, Rory Monahan. Coming up on this week's episode, Copilot Plus PCs have started to ship in certain regions. Also, regulators are investigating Adobe for allegedly ambushing customers with termination fees. And 3 major vulnerabilities have been disclosed in VMware vCenter. For this and more, keep listening to this episode of the podcast, which of course, as always, is brought to you by my sponsors. And that includes ControlUp, end-to-end digital experience management for the work from anywhere era. ControlUp, happy users, happy IT. And also brought to you by Network's Policy Pack, where you use Group Policy, Policy Pack Cloud, or MDM, to remove local admin rights, manage and lock down applications, Java, browsers, and mitigate ransomware, plus more. And of course, also brought to you by Numescent, the inventors of the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops. If you enjoy the show each week, you have these awesome sponsors to thank. And now for some news. Well, the time is now. Some of the Copilot Plus PCs that were recently announced by Microsoft have started to ship this week. That includes devices from the likes of HP, Lenovo, and Dell, but also Microsoft's own Surface offerings that range with 64 gigs of memory with devices featuring the Snapdragon X Elite 12-core processor and 1 terabyte of SSD storage. The Surface laptop starts at $2,399.99. That is for a model with a 13.8-inch display, that Snapdragon processor that I mentioned, and that 1 terabyte of SSD storage. It goes up to $2,499.99 if you want the 15-inch display. There's also a Surface Pro Essentials bundle that starts at $1,144. This includes an offer of savings on a Microsoft 365 subscription and complete protection plan, as well as a discount on other peripherals like the Surface Pro Flex keyboard. Seems a little stiff to me. The controversial recall feature that I've covered at length on the last 2 episodes of the podcast is stated to be coming soon through a post-launch Windows update, but there are still plenty of cool AI features and capabilities built in and ready at launch, like the live captions capabilities, the co-creator in Paint to turn sketches into crisp images, which is something I also talked about on a previous episode, and a whole lot more. Unfortunately, that co-creator feature appears to require a slim pen that must be purchased separately, which seems crazy to me when some of these devices cost $2,500. And as I saw mentioned on Twitter this week, the device's shipping does raise a good question. If Copilot Plus PCs require Windows 11 24H2, does this mean that 24H2 support has officially begun? I would guess so. And just before I move off of AI in this story, I would like to just remind everyone that I will be presenting on the topic of artificial intelligence as it relates to enterprise IT this Friday at 2:30 p.m. BST or 9:30 a.m. EDT for those in the US. You can register to attend the free user group via the Cloudpager user group meetup page, and I'll share a link to that with this episode, which is episode 339, and you can find that at 5bytespodcast.com. The Verge is reporting on a complaint filed on Monday by the U.S. Department of Justice, which claims Adobe has harmed consumers by enrolling them in its default most lucrative subscription plan without clearly disclosing important plan terms. The lawsuit alleges Adobe hides the terms of its annual paid monthly plan in the fine print and behind optional text boxes and hyperlinks. In doing so, the company fails to properly disclose the early termination fee incurred upon cancellation that can amount to hundreds of dollars. When the customers do attempt to cancel, the Department of Justice alleges that Adobe requires them to go through an onerous and complicated cancellation process that involves navigating through multiple web pages and pop-ups. It then allegedly ambushes customers with an early termination fee, which may discourage them from canceling. Customers face similar challenges when even attempting to cancel over the phone or via their chatbot service. The complaint claims subscribers have had their calls or chats either dropped or disconnected and have had to re-explain their reason for calling when they reconnect. Which, yeah, I mean, I've experienced that not just from Adobe, and it is extremely frustrating. The lawsuit alleges that these practices break federal laws designed to protect consumers. So I've said it on a previous episode of the podcast several months ago, but it seems like the US regulators are really stepping up and turning the screw on some of these large tech companies. So it'll be interesting to see how this one develops. Microsoft has announced that App Attach is now generally available for Azure Virtual Desktop. With App Attach, applications can now be assigned to any host pool or session host. You can assign application packages to multiple host pools in your environment. There's Microsoft Entra ID support for App Attach. Hybrid Join will work as it did before. There's a migration script available to move existing MSIX App Attach application packages to the new architecture. Application assignment, removal, and upgrades can be performed without needing a maintenance window and without interrupting a user's workflow, which I think is probably the biggest feature in terms of App Attach. Application groups are no longer required to assign users to App Attach apps, significantly simplifying assignment and reducing the number of application groups needed. Some of these features were in preview since December of last year, so very cool that this is now generally available. VMware has issued a security advisory addressing critical vulnerabilities in vCenter, including remote code execution vulnerabilities and local privilege escalation vulnerabilities. These are tracked as CVE-2024-37079, CVE-2024-37080, and CVE-2024-37081. The vulnerabilities include a heap overflow vulnerability in the DCERPC protocol implementation of vCenter Server that allows a malicious actor with network access to send specially crafted packets, potentially leading to remote code execution. And this vulnerability is rated with a 9.8 out of 10 on the severity scale. There's also another heap overflow vulnerability, very similar, that is also in the DCERPC protocol of vCenter, and it actually enables the exact same type of attack. And this one also carries a 9.8 out of 10, which makes sense because it's basically the same type of vulnerability. The last vulnerability arises from a misconfiguration of sudo in vCenter Server, permitting an authenticated local user to exploit this flaw to elevate their privileges to root on the vCenter Server appliance. And this one is getting a 7.8 out of 10 on the severity scale, presumably because it does require an authenticated local user to exploit the flaw. These flaws impact vCenter Server versions 7 and 8 and VMware Cloud Foundation versions 4.x and 5.x. Security updates have been made available in VMware vCenter Server 8.0 U2D, 8.0 U1E, and 7.0 U3R. For Cloud Foundation, patches were pushed through KB 88287. So don't sleep on these ones, like 9.8 out of 10 needs to be taken seriously. A new malware distribution campaign, which is using fake Google Chrome, Word, and OneDrive errors to trick users into running malicious PowerShell fixes that install malware, has been reported by bleepingcomputer.com. Attackers are using a script which performs some checks and displays a fake Google Chrome warning stating a problem displaying the web page. A dialog then prompts visitors to install a root certificate by copying a PowerShell script into the Windows clipboard and running it in a Windows PowerShell console that's run as administrator. When the PowerShell script is executed, it performs various steps to confirm the device is a valid target, and then it downloads additional payloads, including flushing the DNS cache, removing clipboard content, displaying a decoy message, downloading another remote PowerShell script, which then performs anti-VM checks before downloading an info stealer. There are some other steps that attacks are including, like forcing users to open a HTML attachment sent by email, document prompts, and more. Honestly, when I was reading through this, I thought this seems very convoluted and it's unlikely to work. But this is where I would be wrong, as bleepingcomputer.com has reported multiple cyber gangs have been leveraging this campaign already, so they must see value in it. So just another example of maybe educating end users, and certainly a case for following best practices around UAC on Windows desktops. I mean, users shouldn't be able to do a run as administrator on PowerShell. My employer and show sponsor, Numescent, released the latest version of Cloudpager recently, which is version 1.3.0. and it includes a client log collection feature, group policy object templates for setting client-side settings, and application performance improvements for both AppV and MSIX packages when managed through Cloudpager. So if you're a Cloudpager customer, check it out. If you're not, go to numescent.com to find out more about Cloudpager and what it can do for your organization in truly modernizing your application management for Windows desktops. There is also a big announcement from another show sponsor, ControlUp, who released a new version of ControlUp Real-Time DX, which is version 9. This features built-in folder synchronization, so folders synchronization for Microsoft Azure Virtual Desktop, Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops, DAS, and VMware Horizon no longer requires standalone scripts and are now built into the real-time console. So I think it was Guy Leach's script that I was using in the past when I was using Real-Time DX. Well, actually, it was really just the ControlUp console in the past before Real-Time DX. So it seems like in future, that's not going to be required because it's going to be synchronized just by default. You can now also start a remote assistance session from an active user session from within the ControlUp web interface. There's improved visibility into the performance of your ControlUp monitor cluster and automated actions to improve stability. There's also an optional feature that allows you to configure the ControlUp agent to initiate connections to the ControlUp monitors. There's new metrics, including metrics for Azure subscription budgets, Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops, and NetScaler metrics, as well as new FSLogix metrics. And perhaps the most significant, in my opinion at least, is ControlUp has removed Active Directory dependency for ControlUp monitors and added the ability to deploy monitors through PowerShell. So it seems like ControlUp Real-Time DX going forward is going to work on non-domain joined machines and also Entra ID joined machines as well. So they don't have to be traditional Active Directory domain joined machines for you to manage them through ControlUp and get that data. So really cool. This is something I was hoping for some time, and it's cool that it's here now in version 9. Advanced Installer also released a new version, 21.8, which includes a WinUI Tube.x support in the embedded UI, allowing you to directly integrate modern UI components into MSI installers, eliminating the need for separate exe packages. There's registry component optimization, there's simplified repackager navigation, and there's been some command line enhancements too. So if you want to read up more on these new features, I'll share a link with this episode again, which is episode 339 at 5bytespodcast.com. Everyone's favorite sysinternals tool has received an update. ProcMon 4 has been released with a new process start column, which can be used to filter processes by their start times. So for example, to hide all processes that were running when a process monitor session started or to only show those processes. In the process monitor filter dialog, this column will have the timestamp of the current time as a pre-filled value in the dropdown. Copying and pasting a value from any of the timestamp columns in the main event list also works. The user interface improvements in this version include a more native look to the dark theme, new interface icons, more consistent behaviors for the summary dialogues accessible through the tools menu, better mouse and keyboard navigation, and template values auto-filled to some of the filter columns. The summary dialogues also now have the edit filter option, and the main event list supports a per column count occurrences action. There's also been some general bug fixes and improvements to the stability of ProcMon. They say that copying items to the clipboard from the main event list is faster and also displays the interruptible progress dialog visible with other time-consuming operations throughout ProcMon. It is great that ProcMon lives on and continues to get enhancements. And it's been a crazy week for announcements of new features and releases from vendors. I think this is the last one for this episode unless I edit and add another story later on. But Master Packager has announced Master Wrapper, which is a software that helps experienced packagers package applications into PS App Deployment Toolkit much faster and with higher quality, while at the same time helping beginner packagers learn app packaging, which I think is great because I've seen a big rush to using this app deployment toolkit, and from what I could see, the results were very mixed because I'm guessing that people just weren't really familiar with the process or with how applications should work. It features new improved design and user interface, a modern Monaco editor that improves script editing, and has autocomplete and other features. They've made the script editor available in the community free version now, and users can set the detection key to be disabled by default. There is more in this release too, and I'd encourage you to check out the release notes from Master Packager to read more. I did also notice that they've updated the UI from WPF to WinUI 3, and it looks pretty nice. This week, the Register reported on a recent study by Lansweeper, who scanned just over 1 million instances of SQL Server and found that 19.8% were running on now unsupported versions by Microsoft. 12% were running SQL Server 2014, which is due to drop out of extended support on July 9th, meaning the proportion will be 32% in just a few weeks. Out of the chart that I could see, about 9.11% were running SQL Server 2012, 7.7% were running SQL Server 2008, and there were even some instances going all the way back to SQL Server 2000 and earlier. But it's still significant. I mean, 9.11% on SQL Server 2012 and 7.7% on SQL Server 2008 is a staggeringly high percentage. If you're a SQL customer, or SQL, depending how you like it said, well, you may want to check out your environment and see what versions you're running. And of course, everyone is a customer because we all live in the Microsoft world when it comes to enterprise. Well, most of us. In a bizarre turn of events, a cloud data and analytics company called Snowflake, who reportedly has Ticketmaster as a customer, announced it plans to close its own investigation this week into a hacking campaign that ensnared as many as 165 of its customers using stolen user credentials. When Snowflake discovered attacks, initially they blocked IP addresses linked to the hackers, working with commercial VPN vendors to do so. Mandiant began an investigation in April when it learned about leaked database records that the cyber firm later determined originated from a Snowflake customer account. According to Yahoo, the company plans to release tools later this month that will help customers accelerate their adoption of multi-factor authentication. As Dare on Twitter stated, having 165 of your customers hacked and then closing the investigation by essentially saying, the problem is you, not us, is kind of nuts, and just saying, we'll improve the way that you can adopt multi-factor authentication in a month or so. I don't know if that really cuts the mustard, but hey, ballsy move. Let's see how their customers react. A recent study conducted by Amarok Research on behalf of Digital Realty and Hewlett-Packard Enterprise found that Irish organizations are much slower to embrace hybrid IT to achieve digital transformation success compared to organizations who are headquartered outside of Ireland, which is 44% versus 66% respectively. And this is despite the Irish government's initiatives such as connected hubs, a right to request remote work, and more. So obviously I live in Ireland, so I find this of particular interest. But what is even more interesting is that my buddy Trenton Ty and I analyzed data from many enterprises who use remote access solutions during the first 2 years of the COVID pandemic to track any growth and fluctuations. It was really interesting data to look at. We could see trends that followed logically in line with each country's COVID policies. For example, Australia did not have wild swings of growth like other countries for that initial 2 years, since they remained open and just chose to isolate the entire country from others. But, bringing this back to Ireland specifically, the data then showed Ireland was quite slow to grow remote access during the COVID lockdown periods. One would think, with Ireland being such a hub for tech firms, innovation and transformation would be quicker. But as Seamus Dunn in the article featured in the Irish Examiner pointed out this week, many Irish organizations still believe that IT is just a cost center, not an innovation and growth driver. Many of them are yet to shift their thinking to seeing the IT department as an enabler. So just because the business of tech is booming in Ireland and has been for some time, that doesn't mean the country as a whole rides a wave of technological advancement as a result. It reminds me of when I worked for a certain large tech company who made PCs and laptops. One would have thought that when working in such a company, we would have access as employees to the latest high-end machines readily available at our disposal. But no, we operated as a cost center too. Even if we were permitted to order new hardware through internal systems, we would have to wait months because customer orders took priority over our requests. Ireland is similar in the operation of our tech business as a priority, and the advent of transformation to benefit the Irish public is not a priority. Seemingly, tech companies are happy to avail of tax breaks in the deep talent pool when it comes to tech in Ireland, but while doing so, they want to restrict transformation and embracing of remote work. Figures. In some good news, so far there doesn't seem to be any major Windows Update fallout news being reported for this month's patches. This could possibly be due to people going on holiday as their kids finish up at school, so perhaps less testing is going on this month compared to previous months. So let's not count our chickens before they hatch, but for now, no major news is good news, but I'll keep track of the forums and the patch management mail group and share any news related to Windows updates that are causing issues on the next episode of the podcast. And in a quick hit story to wrap up the news for this week, Microsoft has announced that the DirectAccess Remote Access solution is now deprecated and will be removed in future releases of Windows. They recommend companies migrate to the always-on VPN for enhanced security and continued support. So that's not all that surprising, but if you happen to still be using it, consider moving to always-on VPN instead. And now this episode's scripts, tricks, and tips. Benoit Lecours had a really great blog post on systemcenterdudes.com about migrating group policy to Microsoft Intune. I have to use other people's blog posts as a reference for the feature because it has been broken in my Intune tenant since the initial launch or even the preview, I believe. I can't update existing group policies by importing the newer versions. I can't even delete group policy objects or templates rather that I've uploaded. It's just completely borked, which maybe I need to contact Microsoft support to get that figured out. But yeah, if you haven't tried to import your existing group policies into Intune, this may be an interesting blog post for you to get started. Finally, I saw a really interesting resource shared on Twitter this week, which is basically a compilation of resources for learning cloud-native technologies like Docker and Kubernetes. It's a really cool layout on the website, and it features a whole lot of very useful resources. So if you're maybe getting into your IT career or perhaps a development career and you want to learn these technologies, this is a useful resource. Or even if you're a seasoned professional and you just want to expand your understanding and learn new technologies, this could be one for you. Well, that's it for this episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for listening.